Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. I am Jer Stays, and across the table from me at the beautiful Daily Detroit studios in Techtown is none other than
Norris Howard. I have returned, the Prince of Brightmo, back once again.
We've got a lot to talk about, Norris. I want to give people a little bit of a preview. Yes, we are going to get into the primary election and a couple other stories. I warn you that we may or may not have unpopular opinions. We're going to get into it. But first, as is Daily Detroit tradition, let's talk about where you've been. I know listeners get back to me all the time when our contributors end up going to another city for whatever reason. They want to hear about it, and you were on the West Coast, sir.
Yeah, man, I was in San Diego, one of my favorite cities in the United States. Easily my favorite place to visit in California.
So what about San Diego puts it at the top of the list for you?
Here's why I like San Diego. San Diego has all the benefits of California and like a weird Midwestern folksiness to it. It's mostly, there's a lot of military people, a lot of military families in San Diego, and therefore it just feels more close-knit and more familial. The negatives about California that you always hear when people talk about San Francisco and Los Angeles are a little bit less prevalent in San Diego. And, you know, I think the neighborhoods are just a little bit, you know, just cooler and more laid back. It just doesn't have that same sort of like, I'm trying to be famous as like LA and all the rest of them. But, you know, it sucks because San Diego's getting gentrified by the tech bros too. So, I mean, it's about to be a wrap for San Diego too. So trying to get it in while I can.
Outside of the warm weather, though, I think when you got back, it was warmer in Detroit than it was in California.
It was.
What would you port over from San Diego to Detroit outside of like the stuff you can't move?
Honestly, the food, like the food choices, I love being from here, but I think the lack of vegan, vegetarian options and the lack of sort of fusion cuisine options, it just lacks here so bad. And as somebody who, like, I'm a meat eater, I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian by any stretch of the imagination, but I have grown to appreciate eating vegan a couple times a week, and there's just not many choices here. So, you know, I would much prefer if we had that. And then, of course, I would like to pour over the density of San Diego for sure.
The other thing that I know is you finally got a chance to check out the Book Tower. A lot of us have. I wanted to get your thoughts because it's a unique thing.
Yeah, most definitely. So,
and that's in downtown Detroit. If you don't know, it was recently rehabbed by Dan Gilbert and Bedrock and all that stuff.
Yeah, right there on Washington Boulevard, across the street from the old Trolley Plaza, aka Detroit City Club Apartments.
AKA Khrushchev's influence on design in Detroit.
Exactly.
That thing looks like a Soviet apartment block.
It is. I've lived in it. It is basically that. But it's a really cool tower. I got a chance to sort of walk through it for some things that I'm announcing on the show a little bit later on. But you can go to my Instagram at Great Laker Nori if you want to check it out. But I got a chance to walk through the entire building, see a lot of the amenities, see the units as well for the Roost Hotel that is also in the building. But I mean, the venues in there, the bars and the event spaces in there are incredible. The restaurants are incredible. Right there on the corner of Grand River in Washington, they have a French style restaurant. I'm not even gonna attempt to try to pronounce it because I don't want to do that to y'all, but it's right there on the corner. You can see it from the street, and it is fantastic. As somebody who has been to Paris and has been to, you know, Les Deux Magots and these really sort of French eateries, like it looks like that. Like it looks like Paris. Like it's really shocking how accurate it is.
All right, Norris, let's get into it. This is going to be the uncomfortable part of the program for some people.
You know, as we look at the results of the primary, I'm going to be the first person to admit that I was not only proven wrong, but I believe that my stance has shifted on some things, not with the issue, but on the implementation of what's happened.
Let's catch people up in case they don't know. There was the Michigan primary on Tuesday. On the Republican side, Donald Trump cleaned the clock of Nikki Haley. It's not even close. It's like a 2-1 vote. I'm not even sure what Nikki's doing. But on the Democratic side, something different. And that is a pretty large 100,000 plus contingent of people who voted uncommitted. There was a very large campaign by a number of Arab leaders to basically not vote uncommitted, to send a message about what is happening in Palestine and Gaza, and that they want some change with that. And that ended up with a percentage of the vote that, I mean, look, what I realized posting this was that you can look at these numbers multiple ways. You could look at it and say, well, in 2012, Barack Obama had about the same number of uncommitted voters as they did then by percentage. But then in the most recent ones, the uncommitteds were a far smaller percentage. I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and that is there was about 150,000 vote difference between Trump and Biden before. This is 100,000 voters. This is 80,000 more voters than the average, even going back to 2012. And I feel like we need to talk about it, and I feel like ignoring it is only going to push a part of this coalition away. But also, man, I don't know about you, but this 2012 and 24 are not the same in any way. Like we are completely different political worlds.
Those they shouldn't even be compared to each other, to be perfectly honest.
Why not in your opinion?
I mean, not only are we talking about a post-Trump world, but we're talking about a post-COVID world as well. Like the political discourse is completely shifted.
I think there's been a major realignment in general.
Well, we have two Republican parties. We don't have one in Michigan. We have two. We have your more...
The judge said, by the way, that Hoekstra's in charge, by the way.
Yes, that is what legally is said, but in practice, there are two Republican parties in the state of Michigan where you have essentially the Trump party, and then you have the traditional Republican Party. But moving away from that digression, and now we'll get to the Republican Party and what their issues are, and what I actually think is a even larger subtext as it pertains to the presidential election. But I think as we're talking about the protest uncommitted votes, I think I shifted because originally my stance was, guys, what are we doing? You know, as I consider myself a progressive, like, what are we doing? We can't split our ideology. We have to be focused on, you know, the presidential election. But my stance on that has shifted, and I will freely admit that, is to say, you know, looking at this, the fact that not only is it being talked about, but this is looking like it's going to be replicated on Super Tuesday in multiple states, in those particular primaries coming up next week. And I think this is something not only can the Democrats not ignore, but I also think that the entire political apparatus of the country cannot ignore.
And I'll tell you this, I don't think they are ignoring it. If you look at Hamtramck and such, I don't think the Republicans are ignoring it at all.
But one thing I will say, and this is what I want people to not do, and I don't want to make this a big statement or anything like that, but we got to get out of the realm of thinking this is just an Arab Muslim movement. Okay, they are spearheading the movement because it is fundamentally something that affects their community and their families and what they stand for. But this is not this is not just a Arab American and Muslim movement, because 100,000 people in the state of Michigan have come out and said that this is not what they want. And by the way, a large chunk of that 100,000 coming from Washtenaw County,
Oakland
County. These are not people coming from just Dearborn.
I got this wrong. And here's the other thing. I get a lot of feedback from listeners and from followers. And what I noticed is that the podcast has a more diverse listenership by our surveys than our social media. But white women showing up in a big way for this cause.
Yes.
100%. And that is when you see that start to move where it's jumped that one group. Here's the other thing I want to bring up. There's a lot of people on social media right now that are shaming folks, that they're saying that uncommitted is a vote for Trump, and there's outright shaming going on. And that is only going to drive people away from the party. That's terrible.
Both sides of this issue can't do that. I think you can't, and I haven't seen it necessarily from the uncommitted voters to others, even though I disagree with certain people in publications and whatnot in power encouraging it. I think let it be the community affected spearheading that movement. Let it be the Arab American community. Let it be, the residents of Dearborn and Hamtramck spearheading the movement. That is what I think should happen. So I'm not seeing as much from that end, but obviously on social media, you get the worst of everything. So there are people who are saying, a vote for Biden is a vote for genocide and so on and so forth. And if that is your opinion, that's your opinion. I disagree with that opinion. Because I think it's disingenuous to say that the administration hasn't been trying to push forth a push for a ceasefire. We've seen it. We've seen Biden multiple times go not just in front of the press, but also behind the scenes trying to push Netanyahu towards a ceasefire. This is not something that Joe Biden can come down from on high because, number one, it ain't our country.
Well, this also isn't the 90s anymore. And I'm not an international relations expert, but watching bits and pieces of this, I don't know if a lot of people still believe in a two-state solution. And if you don't believe in a two-state solution, this is not going to end anytime soon.
No, it's
not.
And
even when the ceasefire happens, it's not going to end.
No, it's a temporary ceasefire.
And I don't have a dog in this fight in that way, but from a cold political point of view, if we are at that point, this is going to go on for a very, very long time. And it's just going to... And it never will stop. And it hasn't stopped in my lifetime.
No, and I unfortunately don't foresee it stopping anytime soon. But just to bring it back to the Michigan point of view, you brought up something very important, talking about white women coming out and supporting this, but also Gen Z coming out and supporting this. And that's what people have to realize here is that in many ways where Obama was the bellwether for what millennials, as they were entering voting age and what they prioritized in their sort of cultural beliefs as they voted, we're seeing, Gen Z come out and vote in support of this. We're seeing Gen Z come out and say, this is what we don't want. And I think that is incredibly, incredibly important for all parties in this country to pay attention to, because I have not seen any candidates speaking specifically to Gen Z, and not even in the same way that I felt like Obama spoke to millennials and people my age. It's very, 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 very interesting and a big thing, especially for the left.
Another thing I see a lot of is people saying that, well, these are just Bernie voters from last time. I got to tell you something. If you're Gen Z, you weren't around to vote for Bernie.
You couldn't vote.
You couldn't vote.
You couldn't vote. You weren't old enough.
And I think we have a different perspective because two things. Our audience skews younger. Most news publications are a lot older than us. Most of our listeners are 45, 50 and under.
Right.
All right. The other side is we're pretty diverse. So like 40% plus variety of minorities, which is also very different. If you look like a public radio audience, they publish their demographics. It's
old and white.
Old and white.
Yep.
And so you have to think about the country is changing. We're on a path for two things. We're on a path for, in fact, we're already at the point where the nuns, the religious not affiliateds, are the largest group in this country. We're on path for that to be a majority, and we are on the path for a minority majority. And those are things that are shifts that look. There's just different concerns, right? You have different concerns because of your lived experience.
Exactly, and I think that it behooves all parties to pay attention to that. But I think the here's where I will diverge.
I do want to ask you where we go from here.
Yeah, here's where I think we diverge. I think this is an important moment for not just the uncommitted voters, but I think it's an important moment for people using voting itself as a tool. We haven't seen something like this in the state of Michigan in forever. So I think this is a really important moment. However, here's where I will diverge. The larger problem, I think, doesn't even necessarily lie with Joe Biden and this uncommitted vote. Because at 100,000, I still think you get 2/3 of that 100,000 back in general, right? Regardless of what happens.
Even if it's half, the numbers still work out.
Even if it's half, the numbers still work out. You got almost 300,000 people in the state of Michigan who register as Republicans and don't want Donald Trump. He cannot win Michigan with those numbers. He cannot. Now, it depends on how many of those people remain in the party.
How many of them just stay home?
Or how many of them just stay home. But as we saw in 2020, a lot of those suburban, white, educated voters that have gone for Nikki Haley this time around, they went for Joe Biden last time. And I honestly think all he has to do is come here, go to Dearborn, show up for those folks, work on the ceasefire. But the math there ain't mathing. The math is in Oakland County. The math is in Washtenaw County. The math is in Southern Macomb County. That's where the math is. So if the Democratic Party want to shore up and lock up Michigan, the energy has to go to the Nikki Haley voters. And
really?
Yes, that's where the energy has to go.
So you think there's a lot of crossovers. And to be honest, when I talk to my kind of old school conservative friends, a lot of them, they just don't talk about it, but they voted for Biden. They voted for Whitmer.
Yeah.
That Whitmer 60%, that isn't a liberal coalition. That is people who...
That's plurality.
That's plurality of people who used to vote for Rick Snyder.
Yep.
And that is why you see her govern from the middle. And I think that's why you see Joe Biden, although there is a number of progressive policies, in fact, in reality, you see him govern from the middle.
Yes.
Because that's where the strength is for him and for Gretchen Whitmer, honestly.
Michigan is won and lost now in Oakland County. Wayne County and Washtenaw and majority of Southeast Michigan are what they are, and they are what they have always been. Oakland County has been the shift from red to blue. Everywhere else has remained what they've always been since the Reagan Democrats.
And as we've seen in recent reports, it's Oakland County that's growing in a lot of ways. You see those out. Wayne County is losing ground.
Yeah, exactly. So as we, continue to move forward towards the general election, I would not be shocked to see Biden working on the ceasefire while he's in Washington. But when he comes to Michigan, his time is being spent in Oakland County. That would not shock me. Because to win the state and to win the election, he is going to have to win Oakland County, period.
Are you ready for a palate cleanser?
Sure.
Maybe one that you would find at a fast food restaurant.
Okay. Don't eat
Wendy's.
fast food. Okay. I like Wendy's.
What do you think of, what is it at Wendy's? Is it a Frosty?
I don't even eat Frosties, man. I'm a spicy nugget man. It is a Frosty at Wendy's, but
okay.
I'm a spicy nugget kind of guy.
They're rolling out surge pricing or dynamic pricing, as
Worst
they want to
idea
call it.
ever. Terrible idea.
Okay.
Awful idea. It's so disgusting. Here's why I find it to be disgusting, right? So initially when these reports came out, well, first of all, let me explain what it is. Wendy's is essentially saying in high volume time, so certain windows during the day, they will surge their prices or they will increase their prices based on demand.
AI-enabled price changes rolling out in 2025.
Yeah, AI-enabled price changes continues to be ridiculous, reliance on unproven technology. But whatever. But my point is that you think about like morning rush hour, afternoon rush hour, weekend afternoons, moments where you're going to see a lot of people going out to Wendy's to buy food. They are going to be increasing their prices at those times. Here's why I say that's such a terrible idea. And here's why I firmly disagree with it. Is because that affects so many more people than they think. I think the calculus is that, people in the suburbs or people who have jobs and all this stuff, they're not going to they're not going to care about 30 cents extra or $1 extra on their meal. That's not that big of a deal. But when you think about parents who are using fast food to feed their children, and I'm not necessarily saying that's the best way to feed your kids, but you do what you got to do. If your margins are already thin, and now essentially you could be paying 25, maybe 30% more per meal when you go to, if you're buying over these surge pricing, that's going to be a huge deal. And people already are feeling the squeeze from inflation on groceries, inflation on gas, on electronics, on everything. And now this is being passed on to the consumer with fast food. The people who are going to suffer the most from this are the people who are already over relying on fast food. And I just see it as a really callous way for them to try to get more money.
Look, I think AI has already impacted our lives in so many ways. I think that, kudos to their corporate PR team for putting out there that this is AI enabled, because you know what? A lot of companies are not admitting it. I think there's a way more happening. You don't have the earnings that some of these tech companies have and other companies while you're cutting people. Like that doesn't happen unless
something is there to replace.
Unless something is there to replace that productivity. And I think that AI has already flooded in. I think the gates are already, the horse is already out the barn. Just know it's politically unpopular to admit it. The future of everything is uncertain right now.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by, the unproven tech. It's proven from a sense of companies are using it. It's unproven in our ability to foresee what are the impacts of it.
Right.
And, I just look at this and I look at just the cold calculus of capitalism. And this is where I'm starting to really push back on just unchecked innovation. Because in what world does a company like Wendy's or a company like Google need more money? I don't care. Like at this point,
but you always have to provide for your shareholders. That's their number one.
And that's my issue is that at some point, when it comes to not even just shareholders, at some point we gotta say we doing all right. We gotta just say that. If I got to a point, right, where I'm sitting around and I'm making $18 million a year, at some point I say, I really ain't got to work that hard no more. I think I'm okay.
But I think the kind of people who often make that amount of money, one, I found a lot of rich people just get lucky. Not that there isn't people work hard, but a lot of people work hard and they hit a couple million or whatever. Going to the, I was listening to an interview with Mark Cuban. I don't agree with him on everything, but he is right on. There's a certain level where your work gets you to, and then there's another level where you just get lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to a certain degree, you make your own luck. You put yourself in certain positions. But the main thing for me when it comes down to this Wendy's thing is that I think about a lady who is a single mom, who's got a couple kids, who on Friday nights likes to treat her kids to something at Wendy's. And guess what? You probably aren't going to be able to do that anymore because the only time she'll have to go do that is at 5:30 in the afternoon when they're going to be surging prices because everybody is going to get Wendy's at Friday afternoons at 5:30. So now a meal that may have cost, a bill that would have been $23 is now $29. And maybe that extra money would have been going in the gas tank. It's not going in the gas tank anymore. It's a lot of people and a lot of listeners, I think, don't understand how thin the margins are for a lot of people in this country. And a 30% tack on to a fast food bill of something that should be a treat, something that should be optional, but isn't for a lot of people, is just, in my opinion, cold, callous, doesn't necessarily solve the issue, and ultimately could be something that makes people not want to support your business.
Would love your thoughts. dailydetroit@gmail.com. Norris Howard, so good to see you.
It's always good to be here, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you a lot. Great Laker Nori on all the socials and something special rolling out on Instagram.
Yeah. Check it out on Instagram. It's definitely going to be some Detroit-focused stuff, but also maybe some travel-focused stuff because I hear you guys like when I get out of town, so it might be some stuff going on there as well.
Well, with that, I am Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. Remember that we do this every single weekday, talking about what to know and where to go in this wonderful region of ours. With that, I am Jer Stays.
And I'm Norris Howard.
Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.